just by using the terminology balabatim, it reinforces a very disparaging view of life as a balabas. And there's so many areas that this is, I think, plaguing us. A lot to unpack in that question also. You touched upon a lot of important issues. Let me start broadly and then address the issue and then maybe have a few comments about the Mesilas Yesharim, which I think is important as well. The yeshiva movement, let's say we tag the yeshiva movement starting in 1803 when the Volozhin Yeshiva opened and picking up real steam in the end of the 19th century, was an unparalleled, unprecedented experience in Am Yisrael. And it took Torah from a very, very dormant, languished state, and it superpowered Torah by placing an emphasis on Torah, or it's called in the Yeshiva world Torah and only Torah. And this is not a discussion about the Yeshiva world, but it provided a lot of energy for Talmud Torah, and that's Baruch Hashem, the renewed interest in Talmud Torah and Shmiras HaMitzvos in the world we live, and the growth of Orthodoxy, which is a product of the Yeshiva world. But it also created certain, let's call it certain mind traps and certain challenges I think people have to climb out from under, especially people that have been in Yeshiva. You tell me before we started you just left Yeshiva. I mean, I never left Yeshiva, but I'm a little older, so I have a little more of a perspective. It created a very, in my opinion, unhealthy bifurcation between Yeshiva life and non-Yeshiva life, intentionally, to heighten the passion and the emotion and the drive and the celebration and the pride of being a Talmid Chacham and the Keser Torah. And it came at the cost of balabatim. And even sometimes in Yeshiva, you still hear, hopefully not in too many Yeshivas, but you still hear people when they want to denigrate an analysis of Gemara, Svara, so that's a balabatish Svara. And I know what they mean. They mean that it's not categorical like Reb Chaim, and it's not something that's going to be connected to the underlying logic of Shas, but just by using the terminology balabatim, it reinforces a very disparaging view of life as a balabas. And there's so many areas that this is, I think, plaguing us. My Rebbe Rav Amital told me that when he was in Hungary, he was in a shtetl in Groiswarden, which is a small town in Hungary. So he was very close to the Minchas Yitzchak, of Yaakov Yitzchak Weiss. He was one of the big poskim of the 20th century in Chodesh Welt, who, in between being in Groiswarden and coming to Eretz Yisrael, he was a Rav in Manchester. So Rav Amital was a Ben Bais. He would have a lot of Shabbos meals with Rabbi Yaakov Yitzchak Weiss in Hungary. And he told him about the Brisker Rav, who evidently Rabbi Yaakov Yitzchak Weiss ultimately met, but he hadn't known about him. And Rav Amital says, he's a big Rosh Yeshiva, but he's not a posik. And Rabbi Yaakov Yitzchak Weiss and Minchas Yisrael was shocked. What do you mean? How could you be Rosh Yeshiva without being a posik? Because when you're in the real world and you have real balabatim and you're dealing with families, not just of 18 to 30-year-old yeshiva bachrim, you get a certain balance and perspective that you don't get if you're just in yeshiva dealing with theoreticals. And even today, the shift of rabbinical authority has shifted from the Rabbanim in Batei Knesset to Rosh Yeshiva. It's healthy in some ways. Like, who would you consult with if you had a question? The Rav in your shul or your Rosh Yeshiva? But Rosh Yeshivas live very, very upholstered lives, padded lives. You're living in yeshiva, and the questions you face in yeshiva are not the same you face in the real world. So I think one of the dangers of the yeshiva world is this bifurcation where yeshiva, the high notes of Avodas Hashem, and balabatim is where you're holding on for dear life, trying to tread water, not to slip and regress, but to at least maintain your stamina, rather than seeing, and when Chazal say, lo batlo yeshiva me'avosenu, that our avos always learned, that didn't mean they learned in Volozhin with 800 people yeshiva. They don't mean yeshiva as an institution. They meant yeshiva as an experience, to sit and learn. Yoshev v'lomed. So when Yaakov led yeshiva Shem Ve'ever, how many people were in Shem Ve'ever? There weren't throngs of people. He was sitting and learning, probably by himself on a rock, or with a couple other people learning. But it wasn't this official yeshiva that created an institutionalized experience that then turned post-yeshiva into a constant slide. So I think, in general, it's very healthy and important in general to assess yeshiva and the yeshiva experience in a sober way, especially for balabatim. And you tell me before that your podcast, Baruch Hashem, is trying to help people make that transition, because it could become a self-fulfilling prophecy where you think that you're leaving yeshiva and all of a sudden you're detaching your umbilical cord from any source of religious inspiration, rather than seeing new opportunities, new challenges, as you said before, in the name of Lubyansky as well. So I think it's very important not to make that. Now, getting back to what you said before about the Mesilas Yesharim, look, it's a supremely important sefer, but it was written in the early part of the 18th century in Italy, Rav Moshe Chaim Luzzatto. And in that world, there was still a dualism, which I'm not sure many people in our world experience. What I mean is as follows. The world of Torah and mitzvos, and then the physical world of Gashmios, and the world of Averos, and the world of Torah, and the world of the business, and as if there are two spheres. And when we leave the sphere of the Beis Medrash and mitzvos and Torah, as if we're entering some demonic world where there are forces posed against us. I think if I lived in the 17th and 18th century, I would feel that also. But it's very periodic. When I live in the 21st century, I don't know if you feel that way. Maybe you do. Maybe people are reading Rav Lubyansky's Sefer do as well. But I don't feel that way, in part because of Hasidus, because I think the influence of Hasidus has homogenized all of our experience. And I feel like I'm standing in front of a Kodesh Baruch Hu every moment. When I'm in the Beis Medrash, the last 2.5 weeks, you know how much Torah I was able to learn? Very, very little. You know my Avodas Hashem? I took care of my grandkids, whose father is up north defending our people, literally all day long. I was running a diner and a dish cleaning operation. That's my Avodas Hashem for that moment. I didn't feel like I thirsted for Torah. My kishkis thirsted to learn and to grow in that respect, but I didn't feel like a Kodesh Baruch Hu was looking at me any less, and I didn't feel like I walked away from my Avodas Hashem. And I think some people listening to this, when they read the Mesilas Yesharim or other Svarim at that time, and you pick up this almost dichotomy and bifurcation between the world of Ruchnius and the world I never use those terms. I don't feel there's a world of Ruchnius and Gashmius. I'm an Avodah Hashem. I try to be the best Avodah Hashem I can be, whatever context I find myself. I know there are moments that are deeper and more pointed and charged, like when I'm learning or davening, and there are moments that I'm serving Hashem through midos tavos and through relationships and being a kind person, being a polite person. And I think it's also not just the change of Hasidus, but the gap between the world of Gashmius and Ruchnius in the 18th century, because Gashmius was such a Spartan, difficult world. The physical world was so dark and was so drudgery. And I mean, today you can parrot those divisions between Ruchnius and Gashmius, and then you go out. Imagine starting reading the Mesilas Yesharim. You know, the world outside is horrible, and only the world inside is kosher. And the world inside is full of malachim treifos, and we have to be careful. And then you close the Mesilas Yesharim, you get into your SUV, you go to a restaurant, and go to a Yankee game. There's a gap, and there's a cognitive dissonance. And cognitive dissonance is the death knell of integrated Avodas Hashem. Integrated Avodas Hashem means you want to feel that you're the same Oved Hashem every single second. You're Omed Lefnei HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The expressions are different. So it's a supremely important sefer. Trust me, I have the sefer Mesilas Yesharim literally on my shelf. I just brought it back from the Beis Medrash. I was learning over the summer. But I think some people read it and they don't ask sufficiently, well, does this represent my current world? And if it doesn't, how could it influence that world by giving me a voice from a different world that just reminds me not to overindulge? So I think along with an answer to your question, I think there are adjustments that have to be made, but the attitude has to be not one of tragedy and not one of taking a passport to enter a new realm, but trying to diversify and alter the frequency of your Avodas Hashem now that you're not in the Beis Medrash, which you won't be much of your life.